What's going on, everybody? Trying to make sure I actually have this set up properly. So, today we're going to be going over something that I call the gap principle, which is really just kind of a term that I've coined that is kind of a visual and way of thinking differently about weight loss and the relationship between the food that we consume and other factors that work together to basically help us to either lose weight or gain weight, whether it's good weight or bad weight. And so, really, the gap principle is uh, is the foundation of all fat loss. It's about widening the gap between the number of calories your body burns and the number of calories you take in. So, calories in. The bigger the gap, the faster the fat loss or weight loss, relatively speaking. The smaller the gap between the calories you consume versus the calories you burn, then the slower the results. So if there's no gap, like if the amount of energy you take in versus the amount of energy you burn or expend, no change if there's no gap. But here's the key. The gap doesn't need to be just from eating less food. There's other ways that we can kind of manipulate it, right? So we can either do it by moving more. We can have more muscle and improving our metabolism, which is exactly what we need to do with smarter training, proper fuel or food intake, and consistency of the things that we do, right? And so it's not just about starving yourself or doing tons of hours of cardio. It's about creating a sustainable kind of calorie gap that works with your body, not against it, right? And so most people make the gap too big too fast and then they end up burning out. When you should actually be more focusing on creating the right size gap for your body and your goals and your lifestyle. And so once you kind of understand how to control this gap, how to manipulate it, how to use the different factors to kind of, again, manipulate it, you're more in control of your results. It really gives you more of a sense of empowerment. There's no guessing, there's no magic diet or magic pill. It's just good and real results, right? That's really just backed by science. And so that's really kind of the idea of this gap principle, right? So let me go ahead and just do a little bit of a visual because I'm kind of a visual person. Let me grab my pen. Okay, so let's say this is this line represents your metabolism. So this is your base metabolic rate. So BMR. This is just how much your body generally burns based off of multiple factors like how much muscle mass you have, your just how much you expend via like thinking and that kind of stuff. And so it's like no matter what, on average, this is kind of how much you burn on a weekly basis, just broken down more of a daily basis, right? So let's say this is 2,000 calories a day. And just say no, calories, kcal, is really just how we measure energy, right? It's just more of a scientific way of measuring energy, right? And we can get energy from food. Like food is how we intake calories and energy, right? Our body turns that food into calories or energy that we then use for thinking, for exercise, for movement, for building, repairing muscle, recovering from sickness and illnesses, all that kind of stuff, right? So your base metabolic rate is what we burned. Now let's say you uh, exercise. Let's say you do, I don't know, 10,000 steps one day. So you do 10K steps. So let's do it this way. So you do 10K steps. And that equals plus 500 extra calories for that day that you've now burnt. Okay, so you did 10,000 steps, which means you burnt an extra 500 calories that day, which now means, let's say your caloric burn for the day is now at 2,500. We'll put 2,500. So now you've now burnt 2,500 calories for that day. Okay, so now let's say, let me grab my other pen. Let's say you consume your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and let's say, for each meal, it's like, let's just say on average, let's say you eat about 2,250 calories that day. So 2,250 calories. So let's say you eat all your food, and it breaks down to 22 is not going to be very legible. I'm sorry, but 2250. Okay. Yeah, you can barely even read that. I apologize. But either way, I'll explain it as best I can. So, okay, so you have your base metabolic rate. So that's just on average, based off of different things within your body, you burn 2,000 calories a day. You walked 10,000 steps today or this day, yesterday we'll say, and that was worth an extra 500 calories that you burned while walking that 10,000 steps that day. So your new caloric burn for that day is 2,500 calories, right? Because you had 2,000 for your base, and then you walked 10,000, you burned an extra 500, so now you got 2,500 calories that you burnt that day. Now, let's say now you eat your food. You ate, this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner, everything for the day, right? You ate 2,250 calories, which means if we take how much we burned that day, 2,500 calories, and how much you consumed. So if you take, you burnt 2,000, you burnt 2,500 total from your BMR plus your 10,000 steps, and we subtract it by how much you ate, which was 2,250. That means you have a net of 2,000 or 250 calories. Okay, so you have burnt 2,050 calories, which honestly it should probably be, I know this might be a little confusing, so I apologize, but honestly it should probably be this way. So we should think of your calories as a negative data point, right? So what I mean by that is technically it should be 2,500 calories is how much you burnt, right? So that's a negative value point because you burn it, so therefore it goes away, right? So it should be 2,500 calories, and then it should be 2,250 minus 2,500. All right, so hopefully sticking with me here. That means you have minus a negative 250 calories for that day. So that means because you were negative in calories that day, your body is negative in energy, which means it needs to get that energy from something else. Okay, so where do we get that energy from? We get that energy extra from our storage, right? And so that's what fat is. Fat is fat storage that we hold on our body. And so like when we were hunters and gatherers and we ran around the earth and or whatever you want to believe, fat is how we store energy as reserves for when we need it. And so if we're in a negative surplus for that day, our body needs to get it from our storage department. Okay, so boom. Now, this is something we're going to dive into in another topic, but what's the deciding factor for what we burn? Because there's two different types of tissue we can burn. We can burn fat or we can burn muscle. And the body thinks that, well, I'll put it this way, muscle is an expensive tissue to maintain. has to be repaired. It has to be managed a little bit more. And so if your body doesn't have a reason to keep its muscle, it will get rid of its muscle, which is why you have muscle atrophy. So if people, don't work out and they're in a calorie deficit, they'll actually lose muscle and fat, but some muscle. And so if we want to keep that muscle, we need to give the body a reason to keep that muscle. And we do that by stressing the muscle, because when we stress it, the body thinks, oh, wow, I need this because I'm fighting this thing that is stressing my muscles, which is why we do weight training, right? That's why weight training becomes so important and why people now value it a lot more, is because that's why it's needed, right? So that's why we weight train. And that's, again, how much we do is another video topic. But let's just say that you exercise, you do all of that. So we're good there. So your body's going to use this and it's going to lose. Take this from the fat storages, basically. All right. So that's important to know. So you have 250 calories that comes from your fat storage. And so basically, to kind of circle back to the whole point of this video, the gap principle is this number right here. So how do we create more of a gap between how much we burn and how much we consume? And how do we do it in a way that makes life more enjoyable, less miserable? How do we do it in a way where we lose fat, not muscle? That is really kind of more so the things that we want to dive deeper into. But in general, the gap principle simply is how we widen this gap. And there's a couple ways that we can widen that gap that I talked about at the very beginning when I was kind of going through the definition. And we can widen this gap by either the energy we consume, so energy intake or lack thereof, right? Or movement, or three would be increasing our metabolic burn. Metabolic burn. And then I'll say 4, which is going to be kind of like enhancers. I'll just put supplementation. All right, so supplementation. I'll put supplementation. Again, it's kind of, hopefully you kind of read that. So these are the different ways that we can actually create more of this gap principle. So again, this is going to be your gap, or the gap principle. Okay, so that is what that is. Now that can also be a positive as well. So like if we were to eat, let's say we ate, 2750, and then we'd have a positive 250 calories, which means we would put on weight, which again, same kind of things actually can kind of determine what kind of weight we put on. Now, if we overeat by a lot, our body can only make so much extra muscle, and there's a lot of other factors that kind of go into that. But this also determines, again, kind of like the type of muscle or weight that we put on, whether it's some muscle and some fat, if it's all fat, no muscle, that kind of stuff. So let's kind of take a look at each one of these really quick. So energy intake, which is usually the most common one that most people do, to be honest, which honestly is probably the one that I'm like kind of last one I would rather have people do, because people tend to get more grouchy, more irritated, more angry when you remove a lot of their like food intake, right? Because energy really, again, refers to food intake. Okay. And so energy intake is kind of the last thing that I would do. And it's the most obvious one for most people, which is why they do it. But we just eat less and then we burn more, right? We eat less and then we don't have to burn as much to lose weight. Okay, so this is why we cut calories. Why tracking calories is important, because again, we get to see those numbers in real time, and we can really kind of see where we're at and landing each day. So this is food intake. The second one, which is probably the most common, which is probably the one I prefer the most, probably the most common one I'll use, is movement. Okay, and so this is where having a good balance of weight training to cardiovascular and NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so doing things that's not like a structured exercise format is really important. So for me, kind of a baseline would be, 3 weight training days a week of resistance training. So your body's kind of breaking down and repairing that muscle. And then doing cardiovascular. So starting with Mike, so moderate intensity cardio, and doing that 2 to 3 times a week, which would be something that's not going to make the body sore. Again, I go into that more in detail in a later video, but doing things like incline treadmill, kind of light walking, hiking, swimming, that kind of stuff. Low impact on the body, but burns a lot of calories. And then again, walking. So getting 8,000 steps a day, 10,000 steps a day, taking the stairs when you go somewhere, that kind of stuff. And so movement is usually the one that I'll do the most frequently. And I think it's also important to know that this whole thing is different when you're in a weight loss phase compared to a building phase. Okay. So like when I'm doing a weight loss phase, the amount of movement I'm going to be doing and the deficit and the gap for my calories is going to be a lot different than when I'm in more of a maintenance, just kind of chilling. Right. So movement is the second, probably one of the most important ones. I would say supplementation is probably the easiest. So taking like a fat burner, again, good quality ones. So that's, again, a whole nother video. But supplementation, I feel like a lot of people kind of jump to this one too. Like they'll do like like a lot of these new fat, burning pills, whatever the heck, all those Ozempic, all that garbage that's out there now. They kind of work in this realm, right? Where they either stunt a lot of your hunger. So then again, you stunt your hunger and maybe you speed up your metabolism, and that's going to affect this gap principle, right? And so this is what a lot of people go to because it's the most easiest. You just take a pill and then boom, that's it. But it's also not addressing any of these core factors that are more realistic and things that you're going to deal with eventually. Like you can take those pills for as long as possible. Who knows the side effects? But eventually you're going to have to face some of this other stuff. So that's why it's so important to understand this. So this, and then honestly, all of these kind of affect number 3, your metabolic burn. So this is kind of just like your body's natural operating system. And so you hear metabolism, metabolic burn, you hear that stuff getting thrown around all the time. It's very buzzwordy. But really it's like one of the most simple ways to affect it, good nutrition. So if your body has all the right nutrients, it's being fueled properly, it can operate. It's like putting high octane fuel into a car. If you're getting all those nutrients in, your body's going to be much more efficient at moving things around, repairing, doing all of that. Weight training is very important because the more muscle you have, the more you just burn. Like I said earlier, muscle is an expensive tissue. So the more of it you have, the more you burn on a daily basis. So that's why men generally burn more than women, because they have more muscle naturally, because they have testosterone, those kinds of things that help to do that. And so weight training is super important. That really affects your metabolic burn. And then there are supplements that help with that. Like I said, testosterone, those types of things just naturally or act as more of like a metabolic kind of enhancement. So they help you to just burn more calories naturally. Again, probably more of another video kind of topic. But this kind of gives you more of a deep understanding of this gap principle, right? Simply put, the gap principle is really the relationship between how much you intake, calorie intake, and how much you expend or burn, right? Through calorie expenditure, movement, all this other stuff we just went through. And so understanding that is so important. And it's really kind of like a fundamental piece that a lot of people don't really understand. But once you kind of do, you start looking at things differently compared to uh like a lot of people like they just don't understand some of this stuff. And it's a really kind of a fundamental thing that doesn't get, I feel like, preached a lot anymore anyways. Then again, I'm not really on YouTube watching a bunch of fitness videos anymore. I used to, but this is really my aim, is like break everything into fundamental understanding pieces, because if you understand the fundamentals, it doesn't matter what approach you do, like you can get results and you'll actually know what's happening and why it works, right? And so my mission is to help educate everyday people on the basic fundamentals again, because we live in a world that has too much garbage out there. Not really garbage, but too much information. It's information overload. Nobody knows what's right from wrong or what they should do, what they shouldn't do. This is the best. No, that's the best. Carnivore, vegan, blah, 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 blah. So my goal is to give you the fundamentals, the basics, so you know why these things work, why people do them, why people have success, why people fail. So if you're educated, you can become your own steward to a better life and healthier living. And so hopefully that helps. The gap principle. And probably in the next one, we'll go through some other fundamental principles I think kind of go hand in hand with this. But if you know how to manipulate and build a bigger gap, and you understand these pieces, it really makes your life a lot easier. So, all right, that's it for today. The gap principle. Hopefully that helped, and we'll see you in the next one.